In the Norton Anthology of British Literature, the Medieval Ages, we're looking at three major time divisions. The Anglo-Saxons, circa 450. This is about the time of the fall of Rome. Rome calls their soldiers home. Britannia is vulnerable to invasion, and we see a lot of Scandinavian countries coming in. Then we have the Anglo-Normans, 1066. That's a year you want to remember. That is the year that William of Normandy conquered Britain. He's French, and the French rule for about 400 years after that. So the aristocrats in Britannia for those 400 years are French and speak French. Then we start to see French loan words, L-O-A-N, loan words, into the Old English and what's to become Middle English language. Then we have the Middle English era of 1150 to 1500, and we start to see with Chaucer an English written language, and we start to see a growing middle class, ironically as a result of the Black Plague, which I'll explain later on. Again, circa 450, we have the barbarian invasions. In Brittany, they spoke a form of Old English, which is Germanic and the ancestor of today's English, both British and American. These are Germanic tribes from Germany, often called Saxony back then, and Denmark, today we know as Holland. Then we have the Vikings in the 9th century and the Danes, and these are the major characters in Beowulf. They're pagan Danes and Geats. Their only connection to England is an obscure allusion to the ancestor of one of the kings of the Angles. So look at the map to the right, and you can see where the Geats over there, that would be Sweden. That is where Beowulf is, and he takes the voyage south to Heorot. And by the way, the name of the mead hall, which is a kenning, mead-hall, mead being the drink that is made out of fermented honey, and the hall. Anyway, so Beowulf goes south to the Danes. And then you can see nearby you have the Jutes and the Angles and the Frisians. All of these peoples and their languages influence today's British and American language. These early Anglo-Saxons made up the southeast portion of Britain. They're illiterate, they're pagan, and they are not adopting Roman Christianity. Law for them was a self-help process. Individuals enforced law themselves through a system of wergild. Wergild translates man money, wer meaning man and gild meaning money. If you think about a gilded cage, that's a golden cage. And if you think about the Gilded Era, the late 19th century and even the 20th century or the 1920s is considered a gilded era where the society is very materialistic. We also get the word werewolf, wer meaning man and wolf meaning dog. So that's where we get werewolf. So the wergild, this is a system whereby the members of society, their body actually had a monetary value. So everybody had a value based on their status and their importance, even the importance of their hand. So for a man, if someone causes him to lose a finger, they have to pay that man a certain amount of money. But if it were the pointer finger, it was more money because he hunted and he fought with a bow and arrow, and you need the pointer finger to pull back the bowstring. If they caused him to lose a thumb, well, that's worth more money even than the pointer finger, and they had to pay that money to the man for the thumb. If they killed a man, then he or his family had to pay the man who was killed, his family, a certain amount of money. Now, everybody had a monetary value. Women had less value than men. Young women, like maybe, preteen, had a value, but once they become of childbearing age, then they have a greater value. Sorry, my dog's in the background. Um, and then again, if you're older, you don't have as much value if somebody were to kill you. Sometimes the family would get tired. So say they have a relative that's always causing people to lose digits or kill people or maim them or hurt them in some way, and they're tired of paying out all this money. They can pronounce in the public that this relative, let's call him John Doe, is no longer in the family. He is outside the legal responsibility of the family. So this is where we get the word outlaw. He is out of the law for this family. They are, in essence, declaring they will pay no more wereguilds. Okay, much of what we know about these societies is by poetry, and the poetry covers the lives of the elite. Why? The elite are the ones who had the money to pay the poets, and that's who write the songs, and the songs get handed down, and the poet travels from stronghold to stronghold, otherwise called a keep or a castle, and they travel around and they sing these poems. They sing them. Beowulf is a poem. By the way, Beowulf, if you're writing about it, it should be in italics, because the long poems like Beowulf are they're like a book, and so you would frame that in MLA in italics. Okay, so let's get back to the subject. So we want to get into warrior ethos. You are going to have to know this for the midterm and the final. I'm taking all this time to make these videos, these PowerPoints, and it takes an awful lot of time. There's a lot of stops and starts, so if I go through all that trouble, you can pretty much guarantee I'm going to ask about this information in your midterm and your final. Okay, the warrior ethos. They valued warfare. Why? Warfare is where they got money. War is the main subject. These poems, war, looting, it was very lucrative. So say Conan the Barbarian. Okay, he's really strong, he's muscly, he's tall, he's got a lot of power. He goes out, he sacks some village or something, and he brings back the spoils of war. He's got money now. That's their money is the treasures that they bring back. And so, say you look over there and you see Conan the Barbarian, he's sacking everybody and he's got all this money, and you think to yourself, well, I'm going to follow him. He's the one, be stupid not to follow him. And so these warriors amass followers. They have to get a really good reputation as being a good sacker. And they get that reputation, by the way, through the poetry, and they amass followers. They become a leader. They have the songs written about them, and they do value their reputation. You definitely see that in Beowulf. He's always, yawping. He's always talking about, I am Beowulf, and I had this swimming contest, and yes, my friend, we swam for a week straight in the ocean, and he did beat me, but that's because, I was fighting off all these sea armor, and sea creatures, and that I had all this armor, and I had my sword. And so anyways, it's, these really outlandish tales. But you can see that Beowulf does value his reputation, and it doesn't hurt to have this reputation, because if you are awesome, back then awesome had a different meaning than today. Awesome meant like it would fill you full of awe. It might be an overwhelming feeling, whether it's pleasure or fear. It could be either one. Anyway, so he has this reputation. Well, then maybe people would leave him alone, and you hear, oh, Beowulf or Conan the Barbarian's on his way to my village, and you might skedaddle out of there. So ironically, the things that follow him, the mass members, they're they're not mass members of society. Most of them are farmers, so they're out farming in the field, and so maybe their keep is being threatened, and you find out somebody's coming on their way to attack your fort, and so you would go inside and you would fight with Beowulf or Conan the Barbarian. And by the way, whenever that leader gives you treasures, you know, he's the ring giver, and if he gives you rings or he gives you treasures, there's kind of an agreement there that you will fight to the death to protect that leader. It's an agreement that is made, and they very much felt like they had to hold up their end of the agreement. Except you'll see at the end of Beowulf, maybe some of them didn't do that. They were a little bit scared. And I believe Wiglaf gets angry at them for that. Okay, what none of them are doing, however, is reading. So in doing this readings of Beowulf, you'll see that there's this heroic code. So here's some elements of the code. Strength. You know, Beowulf is constantly, has the strength of 30 thanes in one arm, I believe it says. Courage. They have to be brave. Honor. Loyalty. The retainers fight for the Lord to death, avenge their king, or die trying. That's the agreement they make whenever they accept, the rings and the treasures. Generosity, royal generosity. The king rewards his soldiers. You see Hrothgar rewarding Beowulf. Hospitality. I don't know if you remember at the beginning of Beowulf when he arrives, they look out. He says, "Hi, come on, let me go introduce you to Hrothgar." And, they give them food and drink. Kinship, that king has the word kin in it. So the lords surround themselves with a band of retainers who are frequently members of his family and household. And blood vengeance. Again, that's what Grendel's mother is doing, right? She's getting revenge on the death of her son. Excuse me. So blood vengeance, sacred duty, and if you do not take revenge, if you don't seek that revenge, then you are shamed. In heroic poetry, we see a lot of alliteration. You can go back and look at Caedmon's hymn and see that there are words close together that start with the same consonant, or they have the same consonant sound. I know a lot of translators, especially Simon Armitage, who translated Sir Gawain in the Green Knight. He tried to replicate that when translating it, choosing the modern English words that would replicate that sound. By the way, I want to stop here and say that I couldn't get Sir Gawain in the Green Knight squeezed into the syllabus. There was just too much in that first book, and I wanted to get some readings out of the second and third books. But when we get to King Arthur, I'll definitely go over Sir Gawain in the Green Knight, because Gawain is one of the followers of King Arthur. Okay, so this poetry rallies resistance against enemies. It uses poetic language like lord, warrior, sphere, and shield. So in here, you'll notice lord has a little L. That's when you know you're talking about a war leader. Usually with the large L, you see it talking about God or Jesus. There's a lot of synecdoche, so keel would stand for a ship. So this one, part of something, stands for the whole of something. Iron here would be sword. So instead of saying, "Bring me my sword," he slayed them with his trusty iron. And that is synecdoche. We see that with arm of the law. So the law is often considered a body, the government as a body. And so the arm of that body might be the military, it might be the police force, the National Guard, or the Supreme Court. It could be any of those things. They're an extension of the whole government body, and it's the arm of the law. and they protect us, whether in court or in battle. Kennings, those are two words in place of another, as when sea becomes a whale-road, or a body is called a lifehouse, and fighting as battle play. One of my favorites, and I don't remember who it's talking about, but in Beowulf, somebody's called he opened his word hoard, and so that's his mouth. So this person, you can see that this person doesn't talk much. He's kind of a quiet person. So much Christian poetry is also cast in the heroic mode. So go back and look at Caedmon's Hymn, go back and look at Dream of the Rood, and you'll see both of them describing God and Christ in these mighty terms. They're mighty, they win in battles, and they're conquerors, and they're strong, and they're leaders. So it uses all these heroic terms when describing the deity. And it's hard to draw a line between Christian and heroic, and the best poetry does cross that boundary. Who commissioned these books in Anglo literature? We should know that the monasteries were the main centers for book production and storage. Manuscripts were prepared of animal skin, like calf and sheep, known as parchment or vellum, and these books were extremely expensive, especially those that were illuminated. Illuminated means in the left and right columns of the edges of the book, there's a lot of artistic work done. If you ever Google it and just take a look at a few illuminated Bibles, you would be just amazed. And just think about it. How would you like to put a Bible on a desk to your left and a blank book on the desk to the right, take a feather, sharpen the quill, dip it in a jar of ink, and write that entire book? And when you're done, then you decorate it in the left and right margins. And can you imagine how long that would take and how tiring? Look at the monk to the left. I mean, he's tired. He's out. Printer's down. I thought that was funny. I've been waiting to use it and was so happy to use it in this PowerPoint. So that explains the high cost of books. And but King Henry VIII in the 1530s, he dissolved the monasteries, and many medieval books were lost. We'll go into King Henry VIII in more detail later, but he wanted to divorce his wife because she gave him a daughter and she wasn't giving him a son, and he wanted a son. And so he dissolved the Catholic Church and established the Church of England, and himself as the head of the Catholic Church. So to this day, whoever's king or queen of England, they are the head of the Church of England, and they have to be above reproach, which explains a lot when you look at the way they negotiate society. Okay, so after the monasteries are gone, who's commissioning the books? Well, religious houses, royal courts, and the noble and the gentry. Later, you get just plain wealthy patrons that aren't noble, and they're not the gentry, but after the Black Plague, we start to see a growing middle class, and they have money, so they would commission books. One of the terms that is used to describe these persons is patron. So if they're a patron of the arts, then that means they're giving money to the arts. So in the 18th century, Robert Cotton collected antiquated manuscripts, and in 1700, the sole copy of Beowulf resided in his personal library, and he later willed it to the British nation, and where it resided at Ashburnham House at Westminster. It's kind of ironic that you have the word ash and burn in there, because in 1731 there was a fire. And the trustees, they broke in, burst through the doors, and they just started grabbing manuscripts and documents and throwing them out the window to save them. And in fact, Beowulf does have a few singed edges. So it was that close that we could have lost Beowulf forever. And it now resides in at the British Museum. That was moved there in 1786. But after the fire and before scholars went in and tried to restore Beowulf, C.J. Thorkelin, Icelandic scholar, he copied by hand the entire book. But then the book laid there for years and years, and it got crispy, and the edges started breaking off, and so a crew went in there and tried to restore it or to save it, and they took each page, as you can see in the photo, and they glued it to a new vellum sheet. But some of the words were already missing, and so whenever they first started publishing Beowulf, they had to go back to Thorkelin's copy, and because he transcribed it all those years ago, we know Beowulf as it is today because he caught those words that are now missing. The scene of throwing the manuscripts out the window reminds me of this movie, The Name of the Rose, which is based off a book by Umberto Eco called The Name of the Rose, starring Sean Connery. And he's a monk who has come to this monastery to investigate the murder of another monk. And watching the film, it's really interesting because you can see what the inside of these monasteries look like. There's these crazy staircases that wind up and up and up, and these rooms that are just packed and packed with manuscripts and books and scrolls. And it's really, really cool just to look at it because I think it's probably pretty accurate. And of course, the monastery catches on fire, and Sean Connery runs in, and he's trying to save this one book by Aristotle that was the only one left, and is going to be gone for eternity. And I think it is based on an actual book by Aristotle that we no longer have. But anyway, he starts just grabbing manuscripts, and he runs to the window, and he's several stories up, and he just starts throwing them out, just grabbing all he can to throw them out to preserve them. I mean, he's that passionate about keeping these works. And I just wonder, if Umberto Eco was inspired by the trustees at Westminster trying to save the manuscripts there.